Hi, I'm Kat. I work with Wild Alaskan Company as part of the recipe team. Cooking seafood, I do that almost every day of the week, sometimes multiple times during a day. I at least think about fish or shellfish every day. So today's event is sort of the inside scoop for what has personally made it really easy for me to enjoy seafood as an everyday part of my life. Of course, I work with a company that sells fish, so that makes it easy to have to cook fish. But even if I didn't, these tips and tricks and some of these essentials that I'm sharing with you today will be really helpful for you in your home kitchen. The event's broken up into 3 different parts. Part 1, we're going to do a thawing demonstration. So we're going to cover a few proper ways to thaw seafood, and you might think you know how to thaw fish, but we'll show you the best way and the safest way to do it. Part 2, I will share some fish cooking essentials, so ingredients, tools, things that I think will be really helpful for you if you're new to cooking fish or just looking to hone your skills. And part 3, I will demonstrate an essential cooking technique, also one that is my favorite, which is pan searing. It takes a little bit of finesse, but once you got it, you'll really feel like an accomplished home chef. So let's go ahead and get started. First section is thawing. I know that sounds very, very elementary, but if frozen fish is new to you, then thawing is probably a very new part of your routine. It's an extra step that really is worth it if you are looking for really, really high quality, super fresh fish. You can find fish in the grocery store that has been refreshed. So typically fish in the grocery store, whether it's wild or farmed, is going to be something that was frozen at some point and then thawed for display. So that's what we mean by refresh. When you're cooking with seafood from Wild Alaskan Company, it is frozen pretty much up until the point that you're pulling it out of your freezer. So that's how this fish stays super, super fresh, frozen at the peak of freshness. And you're able to enjoy salmon, halibut, cod from Alaska year round, super high quality. The seafood that I'm going to cook today, I am pulling out a fillet of sockeye salmon. This has been flash frozen with the skin on, and it's ready for you to cook as soon as it's defrosted, or if you're cooking it from frozen, that's an option too. But you know the quality and freshness is being preserved until you cook it this very moment. So let's go ahead and show you the overnight thawing method. This is the classic way to defrost fish. So the first thing you want to do, and this is really important for any thawing method, is you want to take it out of the vacuum sealed packaging. Not all of our offerings are vacuum sealed, but for the seafood that is, should take it out of the vacuum sealed packaging. So I always have some scissors handy for that. And the first thing you might notice if you're new to frozen fish is there is a thick layer of ice on it. And you can even see this is a thick layer of ice. It's not freezer burn. This is actually supposed to be there. This is an ice glaze that is applied to the fish after it's been frozen. So this is an extra layer of protection against anything that happens in the freezer that eventually breaks down what's in there, drying out, oxidation, all of those things. So that's a good thing. But when you're defrosting, you want to make sure to limit how much of this is right up against the fish. But next thing, very simple. We're just going to put the fish on a plate, maybe something with a bigger rim, a dish, a bowl, something like that would probably be better than what I have here. But all you're going to do is put it on a plate and then put it in the fridge. You just want to put it on a low shelf here in case there's any spillage. Limit the mess that might make, and leave it in the fridge overnight for 10, 12 hours, something like that. And after that, the fish should be defrosted through the center. Maybe really thick pieces. If you have a really cold fridge, will still be a little frozen. That's totally okay. You can either wait longer or just go ahead and cook it. Yeah, very hands off. You don't need to cover the fish because it's so fresh that it doesn't smell. Your fridge will not smell like fish. You might even forget the fish is there, but don't forget it. That's number 1, simplest, easiest way to defrost fish. You'll be able to cook it the next day or wait up to 2 to 3 days to cook it if you, for some reason, don't get to it. I do recommend covering it if you leave it in the fridge for more than a day because it is a drying environment for a fillet, and a little bit of that is okay, but you just don't want the fish to turn into, petrified fillets by the time you're ready to cook. That's a method that is probably familiar to you, but the next next method is actually my go-to method. It is the quick thaw. So this is a method that's really convenient and helps you cook any fillet within an hour. Let's say I'm starting to get hungry for lunch and I'm thinking, what should I make for lunch? I guess I'll make some fish. You can go ahead and grab a piece of fish, do the method that I'm about to show you, and then by the time you're ready to cook, it should be ready for you to cook it. So we're going to take it out of the package like we did. Then this is going to seem a little redundant. We're going to put it in a resealable bag, and you're going to put the fish in here. Seal it, make sure the bag doesn't have holes. If it does, it's okay, but we're going to try to limit the amount of moisture that's sitting against the fish. So if there is a hole in the bag, the fish is just going to be sitting in water. We're going to put it in a bag and then grab a large bowl, pan, dish, anything the fish will fit into, and submerge it. Maybe you might need to weigh it down with a plate, something like that. After about 30 minutes, what I like to do is check to see if the fish is still pretty frozen or if it's ready to cook. A thinner fillet might be ready in about 30 minutes, but a thicker fillet, you might want to just give this a change of water and wait another 15 to 30 minutes. Most things will be defrosted within an hour just using cold water, not hot water, not warm water. We want to use cold water here, just out of the tap. After that, what you want to do is just pat the fish dry, because that ice glaze on here is going to melt off and kind of be moisture on the surface of the fish. Not a bad thing for the fish, but it'll just affect how it cooks. So I'm just going to leave this on the countertop for 30 minutes to an hour. I'll probably cook it right after we're done here. One thing I do want to note with the quick thaw method is that you do need to cook it once it's been defrosted. If you're defrosting fish in the fridge, I mentioned earlier that you can leave it there for 2 or 3 days and then cook it. The sooner the better for something that's super fresh, super high quality. But if for some reason you don't get to it, it's okay. If you're defrosting it in a bowl, in water at room temperature like this, you do need to cook it within an hour just for food safety purposes. So very important to remember, this is something that you want to do when you're actually planning on cooking right now. So let me also just mention that you can cook fish from frozen, whether you're baking. Air frying is actually one of my favorite ways to cook salmon from frozen, pan frying. But that's a really good option if you don't have time to spare even 30 minutes to defrost fish on the countertop. And that's okay. Or maybe you just don't mind cooking fish from frozen. I think it's a really great option if you are just wanting to eat something when you're short on time. You do sacrifice some control over the doneness of fish. The outside's going to cook much faster than a frozen inside of a fillet. So I do use this method from time to time, but it's definitely not the Michelin star meal that you could be making for yourself, but it's a really good meal because you're enjoying really good fish. Part 2, I'm going to share some of my essentials with you. So cooking any species of fish, any species of salmon, even if you're not familiar with what you're cooking, I'll say that it can be as basic as cooking any other protein that you are accustomed to cooking. But we do have some essential tools here that I think make it a lot easier. The number 1 tool is actually a virtual tool. Whether you're getting the wild combo box, the wild salmon box, or the wild whitefish box, the most important thing is the how-to cooking guides that we have on the blog. Basically, we have box guides built out for you with some really common, maybe the more basic cooking methods that you would use, with cook times, temperatures, and techniques that are tailored to wild seafood and the specific species that you're looking to cook. I think that these guides are excellent if you're new to cooking fish, but especially if you're new to cooking wild salmon. Wild salmon cooks so differently than farm salmon, mostly just cooks very quickly compared to farm salmon because it's much leaner. The way that farm salmon is produced causes it to have an unnaturally high fat content, and that gives it a longer cook time and just completely changes the way that it's cooked. So for sure, if you're new to cooking salmon, new to cooking wild salmon, new to cooking real salmon, you want to check out these guides. The whitefish and the other cooking methods that we have for Pacific halibut, Pacific cod are going to be really helpful too, because they're just going to help you hone your skills with cooking fish across different methods. So make sure to check those out. We have over 300 recipes on the blog for you to enjoy as well. So hopefully you're never at a loss for what to cook once you kind of hone your skills for how to cook things. That's the virtual essential that I think everyone should know about, but I have a few other things here. So this one is going to look very boring, but I always have a big stack of kitchen towels at my disposal. These are clean kitchen towels that I use them to pat fish dry. And the reason that you would want to do that is when you have moisture on the surface of the fish, it actually steams rather than sears. So even if you're not searing fish in a pan, maybe you're looking for really good grill marks, you're looking for really nice browning when you're putting the fish under the broiler, whatever those surface textures are that give the fish a little extra pizzazz, this is really going to help you get there and instantly level up your cooking seafood game. I also would recommend just using paper towels if you prefer, but I go through so much paper towel that I just have converted to using washable kitchen towels, but whatever you feel comfortable with using, do not skip that step if a recipe tells you to pat fish dry. It's really going to make a difference in what the finished dish looks like and tastes like and feels like. So that was number one. Number two is my fish spatula. I actually travel with a fish spatula sometimes because if I know I'm going someplace, but I don't know if they have a spatula in their drawer that looks like this, I need it. This is a really flexible, thin tool, and this is going to help you flip fish really easily. You're going to be able to transfer it from one thing to another effortlessly because it has so much more spatula area. Just for comparison, I know you know what a spatula looks like, but this has no bend whatsoever. So if you're trying to get a spatula like this underneath the fillet, it's going to be tricky and you're going to have a very hard time flipping fish or moving it around. This, you can do almost anything with it. I use this for more than just fish, but I think indispensable. There's always a little bit of a slant to it. They make it for left-handers that slant the other way. I'm a right-hander. I'm very, very much in the majority for that. So mine slants this way. I cannot live without this thing. I highly recommend investing in one. Next tool is optional, but I highly recommend getting an instant read thermometer if you're new to cooking seafood. I find that this is a really good tool for fish because depending on the cooking method, an extra 30 seconds or an extra minute is going to make all the difference. Your fish can go from perfectly cooked to overcooked within that 30-second to minute range if you're doing something that's very high heat. So having an instant read thermometer is going to give you really, really precise measurement on that internal temperature of the fish. So why does internal temperature matter? This is going to really give you an idea of how flaky or done the fish is in the center of the fillet. It takes a little practice to find where the center is because this tip is usually very sensitive to that. But if you're not really used to knowing what medium or salmon looks like, you can kind of use this as an objective gauge. 120 to 125 as an internal temperature is usually a solid medium rare. If you go up to 130, that's more of a medium. So that way, knowing those numbers and having this as a tool is going to help you understand what your palate prefers, first of all, and then also what to aim for when you're cooking fish. So I don't use this that often because I kind of know what fish looks like or sounds like when it's done. But I do use this for very, very thick fillets because sometimes you just really don't want to have to cut into a whole fillet to see if it's still raw in the center. So that's optional, but highly recommended by me. The next tools that I want to share are actually food. So I have a few essential ingredients that help me to cook seafood anytime. And I think take these as suggestions because everyone has a different palate and preference. But number one thing that I pretty much share all the time is I like having breadcrumbs. These are panko breadcrumbs, so they're a little bit thicker. It almost is like the texture of grape nuts, like that cereal. I really like having these as something to build into a seafood meal. You can use a gluten-free version as well. I think these are probably with gluten. I buy both depending on what I feel like eating, but I like having these as something to sprinkle on a fillet as like a crunchy topping. If you do that right before you bake fish, you'll have a really nice crusty golden top when the fish is done. You can also use this to bread fish, something kind of like just like a really simple pan fry, dredge it in flour, egg, breadcrumbs, completely transforms a fillet from just a piece of protein into something that's like a piece of protein plus. So I also use breadcrumbs a lot to make fish cakes. Fish cakes are a great way to use up fish leftovers. So just flake some fish, put some breadcrumbs in it, a little of this, a little of that, and then that's like a really nice binding agent that'll help the fish cake stay together and be really satiating. So this is what I find to be a really essential building block so that I'm not just cooking a fillet of fish. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but sometimes you just want to keep things a little interesting, especially if you're eating fish and want to eat fish multiple times a week. It's shelf stable. You don't have to worry about a vegetable going bad in the fridge. You'll always have a building block to work with. So that is probably something you have in your pantry now. This specific ingredient is one of my essentials as well. I love chili crisp. It's like a trendy new sauce that you might see everywhere. It's spicy. It's basically oil with garlic pieces and sesame, things like that in it. My friend actually makes this particular jar, but I like having chili crisp as a sauce. That's the important word. I like having a sauce to put on fish that I can use anytime. I don't always have time to make an elaborate meal. I don't have time to chop things. Sometimes I just want to be able to cook a fillet and then put something on it that's ready to go. So having your favorite kind of sauce that is shelf stable or you can hang on to it in your fridge for a while, a little bit of it is going to go a long way. In the summertime, I love having pesto in the fridge, but chili crisp is kind of like my new obsession. If you haven't tried it yet and you're not averse to spice, I highly recommend it. So I'll use a little bit of this later today to turn a pan-seared filet into a pan-seared filet with extra pizzazz. Another ingredient that I think is an essential for me is miso paste. So miso paste doesn't sound that interesting or appetizing. It's a fermented soybean paste, almost as the texture of peanut butter, but it's very salty, but has a very savory flavor. So this is an ingredient that you can use to build into sauces, use it in marinades, glazes. You can even use it in something like making compound butter. So compound butter is just butter mixed with something. If you put butter and parsley together and mix it up, you've made a parsley compound butter. So with miso paste, I like doing a little bit of this mixed with butter and making miso butter. This is just a flavor that I think works really nicely with seafood because it's so savory. That umami flavor will really bring out a lot of the nuances in something as delicate as halibut or something as robust as sockeye salmon. So while I don't know if all of you will be interested in getting miso paste, we do have a lot of recipes on the blog that include this as an ingredient. So I just wanted to introduce it to you in case you don't know what it is already. You can stash it in your refrigerator. It lasts forever because it has such a high salt content, and a little bit of it goes a long way. So, you might keep this in the fridge for longer than you expect, and that's totally okay. Or you might end up really loving it and going through it, and then you can just get more as you need to. So if you don't know where to look for it, it's usually in the refrigerated section of a grocery store. I have seen shelf stable versions that you can buy on the shelf, but you do have to refrigerate it at some point. So that is my third ingredient that I want to share. I think that's it in terms of my essentials that I want to talk about today. So first of all, I just turned on the heat, but let me grab the filet that I'm cooking today. So I have a filet of fish that I defrosted in the fridge the classic way. I actually went ahead and just defrosted it on a kitchen towel, and that way all the moisture that would have melted off into the dish just got basically absorbed by the towel here, and that I can just throw in the wash. I put this in a little bit late, so it's still a little frozen in the center. I have a little bit of an ice crystal. If that ever happens, that's okay. You can either just peel it off or give it a rinse. A quick rinse under a faucet, running water is fine. But otherwise, go ahead and pat the fish dry to remove any of that excess moisture on the surface of the fillet. It's a gentle pat. You're not squeezing out a sponge here. Moisture is fine in the fish. Just the surface is what we're really thinking about right now. So this is a fillet of coho. The fish that I was defrosting earlier was sockeye. One thing that you might notice as a difference between sockeye and coho is a lot softer. It has a more delicate texture. So sometimes when it comes out of the package, it'll look like mushy. Sometimes it gets cracked. That is 100% normal, totally okay. And once we get this cooked, this is going to firm up and look very flaky and beautiful and wonderful. Sockeye is a firmer variety of salmon, or it has a firmer quality. It has a little bit more of like a robust texture and taste. Coho is something that I actually prefer to sear sockeye, but I wanted to do coho today just because I don't do it that often. They're really interchangeable though. It's up to you in terms of like what your preference is for choosing which fish to cook which way. I'm just gonna leave this here for a moment. What I will do is season this side with a little salt. I find that a lot of times when I'm doing these events, I'll forget to season the fish and it still tastes really good afterward because the fish is so tasty. So that's just a note. If you don't want to use salt, you really don't have to. That's always a pleasant surprise. But one thing I didn't really talk about as an essential is having a high heat cooking oil. I'm trying out this new oil. I'm not endorsing it necessarily, but it's called Zero Acre. And it's supposed to have a really high smoke point, and I've used it a few times. It sears really nicely. Another option that I think is a good one that I've used in the past is using something like ghee. Ghee is just clarified butter and sears really nicely. You never want to sear with butter. You don't want to go over a medium heat with the butter because it will burn if you're trying to sear something. But I'm going to use oil today. Whatever you are using at home, just make sure the smoke point for it is, I think, above 450 at least, because when we're searing, we want to use a very hot pan. With fish, medium high is fine. I'm just going to add enough to kind of cover the bottom of the pan here, about a couple teaspoons maybe. And once this oil gets nice and shimmery, so it's going to be sizzling hot, that's when we want to add the fish to the pan. You might need to kind of like get to know your stovetop if this is new to you, understanding what sizzling hot looks like and sounds like, and also just give your pan time to heat up. I like preheating the pan before adding the fat to it, whether I'm using, like an oil or clarified butter, but I think either way works. So now everything's going to move pretty quickly. First thing I'm going to do is make sure I have the skin side down. And you probably can't hear this, but it is sizzling hot indeed. If you don't hear a sizzle when you are putting the fish into the oil, it's not hot enough yet. So either raise the heat or give the pan another minute, depending on what your setup is like. So as soon as you add the fish to the pan, if it's sizzling, make sure it has good contact from the pan to the skin. And the way to do that is to use your fish spatula. Just give it a very firm press for maybe 10, 15 seconds. You can do this throughout the process as well. Whew, getting splattery here. There's no way to avoid the splatter, by the way. So the reason that you want to make sure that has really nice contact is that the salmon skin pulls away from the pan and starts to curl. Like, be sure to put really nice contact on it just so that you can get the crispy skin. There's nothing wrong with the fillet curling and like pulling away from the actual skillet. You're just not going to get a really solid sear on the fish. So that first 10, 15 seconds is really important. If you're searing multiple fillets, what my suggestion is to add one fillet at a time, press down, add another fillet, press down, and just kind of stagger it by 15 seconds or so that you have that opportunity to get a really, really good skin contact. So we're just going to leave this in here for maybe another minute or so. You will be tempted to make sure the fish isn't sticking to the pan if this is something that's new to you, but don't touch it. Just step away from the pan. Trust that things will be happening as they're meant to. The fish is actually going to sear and kind of seal itself off from the pan once it's ready to flip. So the fish will tell you when it's ready. You just kind of need to be available to know when that moment is. So usually you'll see that the fish starts to become really, really light. And once that like line on the fish, here, do this. I look for this sort of line here to be forming almost halfway up the fish. And that's kind of the moment I know it's ready to flip. You also may have just noticed that I had to do almost no maneuvering to get the fish off the pan. It came up really easily. So that's a testament to the fact that the pan was hot enough and that the fish was patted dry. Having moisture on the surface of the fish will kind of encourage it to stick to the pan in a way that you don't like. So that's another important thing. So the skin is looking really good and crispy right now. Got some nice browning here on the edges. And what I actually did was I just flipped the fish for the flesh side to hit the pan for maybe a minute or two without the heat on. Depending on how thick the fillet is or how done you like the fish to be, maybe you want to leave the heat on for 30 seconds or a minute. Whatever you do, it's going to be fine. I think with fish like this, 30 seconds more so in the pan with heat was good, and then we'll just let it finish cooking on the other side, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to turn my back for a minute. I think that this is going to be done and perfect. So right now I'm going to plate this fish here. I like serving the skin, the fillet skin side up, but let me just bring it a little bit closer to the camera. So this cooked so beautifully and evenly. There may be a couple spots in here that didn't get perfect contact with the pan, but that's because the skin got so crispy and bubbly that it's almost like cracker thin on the side. This is not easy to do with wild salmon because you have less time to work with. The more time that skin can spend in the pan, the crispier it'll be. But you're always balancing that texture with the doneness of the fish. So if I were to flip it this way, you're never going to get a sear per se on the flesh side because most of the fat is actually in this on the skin side. There's a little bit of browning just from the oil, but this fish, to test if it's done, I could use my thermometer or I can just use my fork. What we're looking for is a really, really easy flake. And as you can see, that corner of the fish, it was a thicker part of the fish, just came off very easily. So this is super moist, tender, perfect in my mind. If you need to cook it a little bit more, you might not be able to get that perfect flake, but you're still going to have a very tasty piece of protein. It'll just be a little bit on the drier side. That's okay though, because if you have a sauce fixes a lot. A sauce also adds to things in a good way, even if nothing needs to be fixed. So I'm just gonna put some of this chili crisp on here to make this even better than it already was. Yum. I will go ahead and take a bite and hopefully you're a little bit jealous. Perfect. Tender, juicy, flaky, all the really good things that I'm looking for when I'm cooking fish using any cooking method. If we wanted to just see like if the doneness is good here in the center, because this fish was a little bit frozen still once I cooked it, it's probably a little bit underdone in the center here. If that ever happens to you, this actually looks fine to me, but if that ever happens to you, all you really need to do is put it back in the pan for a little bit and it'll finish cooking through. This pan is still quite hot, so leave it on there on the flesh side for another minute or two and then check on it again. And it should be done by the time you're ready to dig in. I really hope this showed you that it can be done really easily. You don't have to have any special equipment. You might have to have this though, but you can do it with a fillet like this. It's just going to be a little harder to maneuver around the fillet, and it might break in half because it's so flaky, and that's not a bad problem to have. So let me go ahead and close out. Join us next week. We're going to be cooking king salmon. Don't miss it. And that's it. Live wild, everyone.